All right. So as simple as that, we are live. I'm excited to chat with you, Robert. For people listening and myself, can you give maybe give a description of Lukka since you're now leading this company? You've been here for a couple of years. Talk about what the company does and maybe why you joined when you did.
Sure. I joined Lukka in October. It'll be 3 years. Joined from PwC, where I
Mhm.
was a management consultant working in their financial services practice. I was working on a lot of different technology transformations for a lot of the big banks, a lot of stuff that stemmed from all the post financial crisis regulation, and really focused on helping to put in risk governance programs related to managing technology risks specifically, and worked with a lot of companies on cybersecurity related engagements or incident response, so large data breaches and other types of remediation. And I was introduced to Lukka. Saw that they were building at the time. So this was in 2018, an institutional grade software product, and they were doing it with AICPA SOC controls, or service organization company controls, and there wasn't any other crypto related businesses at the time that had done that. So Lukka was the first, um, and I thought that was very forward looking. In short, I once I had done research and had decided that crypto was going to be in the future, and I thought was a rapidly growing industry. I wanted to be part of a company that was going to really cater to the future of that industry, which is when the big traditional institutions enter, which is exciting to see happening right now. And then there was a big focus on data and managing data in a responsible way, data quality, and ensuring that it's accurate and complete. And for crypto assets, that's very challenging because inherently it's very disorganized. We're missing standard setters and so on. So those things in combination are really what attracted me to Lukka when I first joined. And now it's very exciting to see some of those ideas materialize more recently, obviously, with all the momentum that's going on. You're on mute.
Oh, the classic mute. Um, Help me understand the technical aspects of why, you mentioned a few specifics there. I'd love to understand technically what
Sure.
what Luca maybe was doing in the beginning or what you saw as what it could do and what these standards are and why they're significant.
Yeah, so Lucas started off in 2014, so way before I joined, as a retail crypto tax calculator, and it was the first of its kind, particularly that accommodated multiple cryptocurrencies. Some of the original funding was in Ripple, and then around the 2017, 2018, a bunch of crypto funds had emerged, and there was a need for fund administrators, fund auditors, and some of these institutions to serve clients who had crypto portfolios, but they had to do it to very different standards than what existed out in the industry with all of these retail solutions. And so that was the premise of the Series A funding for
Mhm.
Lukka. This was right before I joined, and that was really the first time that Lukka scaled after getting Series A funding. And really some of the challenges that we had to focus on at the time, and there were a ton of lessons to learn as doing it. But one is that you need to integrate institutional grade um, data products into any software solution in order to really make it usable. There's a ton of solutions that are out there that have pretty interfaces and charts, and from a marketing or a sales perspective look great. But then really when you start using them, you realize that there's a lot of nuances that make them very difficult to actually use because, for example, Kraken used the ticker symbol XBT for Bitcoin until just a few months ago. In contrast, Coinbase used BTC. And any exchange that's out there trading any asset can choose any ticker symbol that they want. So there aren't any formal
Mhm.
standard setters that are out there. And so we need a data product in that maps all of that down to like assets. So then we can do all the downstream processes. And when you're doing that with a couple assets, that could be easy. People can manage it in spreadsheets and whatnot. We cater to over 9,000 crypto assets now across our institutional customers. So obviously, the more complex portfolios that have very often hundreds of crypto assets, that becomes much more tedious, if even possible, without an actual software solution and the right data products ingrained into it.
Mm,
And then there's a lot of other characteristics like decimal place precision. Traditional transaction data usually doesn't need to go beyond 2 digits after the decimal place. For Bitcoin, we need 8 digits past the decimal place. For Ether, we need more than 30, and some other assets, sometimes more than 50. We've seen. And if you truncate that around in using any traditional software, or the infrastructure isn't designed in order to be able to contain that data, it'll either be really costly to retrofit, if even possible, and you end up with a lot of issues downstream when you're reconciling all of
mm,
that. And there's a number of other characteristics. I mean, normalizing date timestamps, and a number of other data fields that are all part of
mm,
the process. And so that was the focus, was really on the inherent data and turning it into the usable data that we could do for reporting.
mm.
And people often underestimate those challenges.
So, so an example. So, walk me through like what would be a typical customer of yours, where they have assets in different exchanges, and those assets are they're referenced from different ticker symbols, so to speak, or XBC or BTC, and then would you guys be the mapping software? So you'd integrate into their portfolio, and then you map all the different symbols together to have
We
one.
actually hold their portfolio for them. So we're
Mm,
helping them construct their portfolio, because most often they're trading across, we'll call it 50 or more crypto assets, usually more than 10 different sources of that. So, one source would be a crypto exchange like Kraken, or an OTC desk, or maybe a hosted wallet like Fireblocks. Um, and we'll collect it from any and all of those sources. Then we normalize it with the data, but we're doing that inside of our cloud
mm,
environment, um, and helping them construct and organize their portfolio so that they can do downstream reporting, and they can rely on the financial outputs, so all the gain loss calculations, income
mm.
calculations, and so on.
I got it. Got it. And when you joined 3 years ago, would you call it a pivot, or would you call it a shift, or even a change in the business model from what it was? Because
Sure.
it didn't start off in 2014 as crypto focused, right?
No, it really happened right before I joined.
Mm,
So they had just pivoted when I joined, which was to be an institutionally focused company. The company relocated from being headquartered in San Francisco to New York City, for example. And there's a big focus on catering to traditional financial institutions, and all those participants at the time.
mm.
And so I came in right after that decision had been made, which was one of the things that attracted me to them, was the fact that they were going to be catering to institutions.
Yeah.
And now that's been, our core segment and capability since, really since end of 2017.
Yeah.
And so we cater to over 250 active crypto funds through fund administrators. We have over 12 fund administrators we work with. We've announced some of the larger traditional ones like State Street recently, and it's very exciting to see a lot of the traditional businesses start to finally launch things related to
Yeah.
crypto.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. It definitely, I don't know if I even say validates, because it feels so validated at this point, but it's good to see. Yeah. Like you said,
It does. It is some validation, I think, for the whole industry. I
yeah.
mean, crypto is not new, right? It's been around over a decade now, but now it's becoming more mainstream.
Yeah. It's surprising how long people are willing to say that crypto is overrated, or they don't see any value,
Hmm.
or that it's just for drug dealers, or that it's never going to compete with the incumbents. I have a cousin who's 30 years old, and he works in New York City, and he's still skeptical. He works for one of the big banks out there, and he's very much mindset wise, he's thinking like, oh, crypto, what value does that have? I think a lot of that honestly is just only seeing the world that you're in, only seeing maybe New York City, or being in the US. We have so
Hmm.
many banks, we have so much infrastructure to move money around, but that really is not typical in other countries and
Hmm.
parts of the world, and even between countries. And even with our own banks, they're 9 to 5, and they don't work weekends, and they're super slow. And
Right.
yeah, yeah.
It is. It's very exciting. I mean, when I can say now my grandparents and parents own crypto, which that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
Then So anyone else that hasn't quite embraced it or is at least looking at it, I think is really just missing out on some big opportunities. They need to be more open minded.
How about you live in New York City? Is that right? Or New York?
No, I live down in the DC metro area.
Oh, okay. How about from being at PricewaterhouseCooper? Is that right?
Yep.
PwC? Yeah. How do you? I imagine you stay in touch with some of those folks. Do they still have a? Is there still a large group of people who are resisting crypto that are working in more traditional incumbent banks or
Yeah,
consultancies?
I mean, I think every big firm or big institution is going to set their risk appetite individually, and they're all going to enter things like this at their own paces, and that's what we're seeing right now. But I haven't spoken to uh, any of the big four firms right now that aren't doing a lot of things in crypto, right?
Wow.
All in different ways, but they all are. Um, and three of them are Lukka customers right now in various ways. And we're seeing a lot of movement towards supporting additional business units within big firms like that.
Mm,
And we see lots of other firms that have been doing it for a while that jumped in a little earlier, like RSM or Grant Thornton, and a lot of the other top 10 firms, and working your way down. We see a ton that have been doing crypto for quite a while and have formed pretty mature capabilities
mm.
around it.
Have you seen any? I'm curious if you've seen any incumbents do anything really interesting or innovative, or are they mostly taking their assets, their cash, and they're putting it into crypto? I mean, that would be probably the first step before you do
Um,
anything.
well, yeah, I guess it depends on what participants you're talking about. If we're talking about those big firms, right? They're service
Yeah.
providers or they're auditors, and they usually have tax teams as well. And so they're each of those different groups are all moving on their own paces as well.
Hmm.
But if you have a big client that gained exposure to crypto, like we saw, the news about Tesla, and if you're Tesla's auditor, you don't really have a choice whether or not you're going to audit crypto on their balance sheet, or whoever the client is. And so that's really what we're seeing right now is if a business makes a decision to do it, I'd say very often I would assume that they're having some type of conversation with their auditor. I know we do when making big decisions like that. But not always. But regardless, if your client is calling you up and saying, "Hey, I've got crypto," or "I'm about to buy crypto," how are you going to continue to serve me? Then it sets a different type of urgency
Hmm.
than when you don't have a client
Yeah.
knocking on your door.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good
and
point.
it's happening across the board. I mean, I don't speak to a single traditional business today, whether it's a financial institution or a big consulting firm or whatnot, that doesn't have clients who are saying that right now. So that's definitely the theme that's going on, which is creating a lot of momentum. It's making companies pick service providers and whatnot so that they can get to market
Mm.
quickly.
How much of it, if you had to take a stab at it, how much of that excitement to move into crypto is optimistic views on the price increasing of crypto in the future versus um, caution about the dollar versus companies just have a lot of cash on hand and they need to put it somewhere to diversify.
I think that it's, the price and how it compares to any traditional markets is maybe the very first phase that someone getting into crypto experiences,
Mm,
right? It creates that curiosity, or they hear their colleague or family member or someone that had some really attractive gains, recently, on their investments. And I think that's just what gets them in, and they'll buy something easy like just Bitcoin or Ether, and then that's just then they go down a rabbit hole from
mm,
there, and end up sometimes going to DEXs or other things that are a little bit more progressive when
mm,
it comes to trading. But no, I mean, I think all of those things, it's just that's really like the first step. It's just that's what gets people, it's what piques their interest, and then from there, they start doing a lot of research, and they realize, one, there's this whole ecosystem that's out there. Like, this isn't all about Bitcoin, right? It's about people exchanging assets in fractional quantities without borders around the world in this global marketplace, so that it enables people to have access to assets that they traditionally didn't have access to. and even the small investor can buy them in whatever amount that they want to invest. And and then from there, they start realizing the value behind all these different platforms. So how, like, Ethereum is powering all of these DEXs, or how any of the other coins are supporting other things that are a lot more innovative than just a store of value that's tokenized. Um, and honestly, I usually don't comment on what I think is a better protocol or less one. I mean, I really just am a big fan of the competitive aspect of it, and everybody innovating on top of other people's ideas and whatnot in this global marketplace. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's going to result in something that I think that we haven't even seen yet,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's fun, I'd say. It's entertaining to sort of speculate as to what's cool or what's interesting or novel. But ultimately, the thing that I find most beautiful is that from the high level, that it's an open competition for who can build the most value and attract people
right.
to do something really useful in the world. There are a lot of, certainly I think early on, being that it's inherently decentralized and that it's about money, there's a lot of scams. There's no better way to put it. It's people trying to hype up something that it doesn't really exist. Kind of the ICO bubble a couple
Mm-hmm.
years ago was I feel like the peak of that. And then it seemed like the 2008, 2000 or 2018, 2019 dip was really a kind of weeding out of sorts. I was running a crypto
Mm-hmm.
company for the last 3 years in during that time. And it felt like there wasn't a lot of tolerance from professional crypto investors for shiesty projects, for people who weren't all in, for they really I think what I view that time as having done is it sharpened up the blade for investors, because the investors who are going to invest in companies have to be smart, and these are
Right.
folks running funds as opposed to just individuals throwing money in there. And I think the funds serve as a signal for other people, the
Mm-hmm.
casual consumers. And initially, if you just throw money at it from a fund, you're not doing anything, you're not providing value to the marketplace. So I think the the nuanced technical assessment that early stage funds provide in the crypto space, and like seed
Mm-hmm.
round, if you even call it that, because they're usually investing in the token themselves, that got sharp. And now we're moving
Mm-hmm.
from sort of that layer one infrastructure into application phase, which is
Right.
really interesting. Really, where it's really
Yeah,
exciting.
I mean, if you think about it, I mean, what hedge fund or mutual fund or financial product doesn't have marketing and a sales process behind it? I mean, any company that's going public and listed on any traditional exchange, um, is going to promote their business and try to sell you it, just like the ICOs are. So I don't really see a lot of differences in that regard, right? I mean, they're doing it in maybe some new ways, but the same intentions are there.
Mm.
And a lot of this data is not decentralized at all. I mean, a huge portion of the volume that's going on is happening in private databases behind all the exchanges, like the Coinbases and Krakens and whatnot. They all have private databases, um, and that activity is not public or decentralized
Mm.
whatsoever. Um, and But that's okay. I mean, what you're benefiting from is a new way to trade. I mean, trading assets for one another without cash, right?
Mhm.
That's something that's very unique. And in order to do that, you have to facilitate trading them in fractional quantities.
Mhm.
Um, and then you get all the other fun products on top of it. Obviously staking is a big thing right now. NFTs are all over the press. I mean, NFTs aren't new
Mhm.
either. Um, and non-fungibles are very old. Wait, of course, is it predated crypto at all. But now we're just seeing these new marketplaces for people to exchange assets, and it's an easy way to uh, to create a value next to an asset that before you couldn't sell in any type of an online marketplace.
Mhm.
So that's all very exciting. And
Yeah.
again, don't think that we've seen even the beginning of what this is going to end up making.
Yeah. Do you think it's do you think you can triangulate what it looks like in, say, even 10 years or 15 years? I mean, or is it just
I wouldn't even know where to start.
yeah.
I mean, I mean, I believe that there is a version of the future where all assets benefit from this technology and cryptography in one way or another, right? So tokenizing assets, I think it's just a more modern way and much more attractive way to exchange one asset for another. Um, but when that's going to happen and how materially and how it evolves, I mean, would be very hard to predict,
Yeah,
right? But I do believe that it is in our future in a much more material way than it is today.
yeah.
I think that I say with a lot of confidence. But
Yeah. There certainly seems like as it grows, particularly NFTs grow, it's going to be on areas where I think of art having making a lot of sense because you may be investing in art for the value of the art itself as opposed to
mm-hmm,
you may there's so much art that
sure,
just in storage, museums or
mm-hmm,
basements. Same with wine, so a lot of that doesn't need to change
right,
hands. So that seems to me to be the early like
mm-hmm,
the early adoption curve. Um, I wanted to ask you. I know you in your history. You worked in the Marines, the U.S. Marine Corps.
yep,
I'd love to learn a little bit about the transition from what you did there to leaving. I know you work a bit
sure,
with veterans. I'd love to just maybe a lot of people like myself who didn't serve don't get exposed to this world at all. I don't know really. I have a clue of what it's like to serve. It's quite topical now with the Afghanistan being in the news every day. I'd love to just hear about your experience, what it was day to day, and what it was, and how it has been for you leaving, and how it typically is for other folks.
yeah, sure, yeah. I've done a lot of work related to that. In short, um, veterans can add a ton of value to different businesses in a ton of different roles, right? And they're excellent problem solvers. They're very focused on achieving objectives and doing things on time. Um, and and I'd say typically have a lot of professional characteristics that are very relatable to corporate America or a number of other jobs. I mean, all depending on what someone wants to do when they leave the military. And it's all about just translating the skill sets in a bit of an untraditional way to the new job, right? And picking out some of the things that you might do in that job. So if you're leading small teams, going to an organization where you're also leading small teams, or if you were leading larger teams, right? Like then you've got a different skill set than someone that was a small team leader. Someone who frequently presents in front of audiences and senior people. I mean, that's a trait that's very useful for consultants, for example. I mean, they're presenting things all day long. So a lot of those skills, I think people sometimes forget about. Where when you come in, it's often some of those skills are harder to teach someone than the actual subject matter expertise that they're getting into, particularly when you're early in your career. Um, and um, but yeah, I mean, I've seen ton of success from veterans, and and I'm a huge fan of hiring them into really any businesses, provided it's being done the right way, right? Hire people that are qualified for the job and set them up for success. It's interesting how I'll hear some businesses will try to hire veterans just because they're veterans, which I usually
Yeah.
don't recommend to do. Give someone the job because they've earned it and it's the right way, and then you're actually setting them up for success. And you might need to mentor them in new ways when they're starting. But if you do pick the strong candidates, then you're probably going to end up with a much happier employee and someone who's performing much better than gifting a job
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
maybe expecting that you're going to have to do a bunch of extra
Hmm.
mentorship.
Hmm.
And there's nothing worse than hiring someone that's the wrong fit,
Yeah.
and then when they're fresh out of the military, and then letting them go, and and then having them go into their next job with less confidence, right? Because they're um, I'd say stereotypically veterans do not like failure, right? Particularly ones that had very successful military careers. So
Mm.
um,
How about using computers? Are people in the military? I'm sure this depends on the specific focus, but
sure.
is there computer literacy? like are people using laptops pretty much every day or
Sure. Yeah. I
rarely?
mean, who doesn't use a laptop over the last year with COVID?
Yeah, true.
And the government, and the military is no exception.
Yeah,
I'd say in many cases they're probably more experienced in a lot of those
yeah,
soft skills than others. It all just depends on the individual at the end of the day. I don't think you can stereotype
yeah.
the military into having or not having some of those skill sets that you would expect. And very often you'll be surprised that they actually have a lot more experience than your average person
Hmm.
that's not in the military.
That's cool. Well, good for you, man. I appreciate it. It's obviously an awesome way to give back is to help other people make that transition
Mhm.
because it hearing through the grapevine, it's difficult. People struggle with it.
It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different, and it all comes down to each individual at the end of the day. And there's tons of good programs out there, and support groups and mentorship groups that support veterans transitioning,
Hmm.
um, that that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. On Luca, one thing I was going to ask you earlier, what's the most difficult part of it? What do you sort of spend a lot of your time thinking about within the company, getting right and making sure you get right? You guys there's a lot of different parts to the job, to the product deployment and sales and marketing, but yeah, what's kind of the thing that you have to get right that you spend a lot of time thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, managing technology risk, although I'd say that, that's something that thankfully we've got very mature processes on. So I wouldn't call that the hardest thing, but it's a continuous effort. I mean, we've more than doubled our company in about the last 5 months.
How many
So,
people now?
so we're over 90.
Yeah.
Um, and so obviously whenever you hire that many people quickly, particularly in a remote environment right now with the pandemic still going on, that's going to be challenging for any company. Um, and then it's really just keeping up with all the innovation. I think. I mean, right when you think you've got your software solution or data solution that's figured out, and then DEXs emerge in a more material way, or NFTs or any of these other um, new businesses, which are all great. But then we sit in the middle and back office space, and it's very important for that stuff to keep up with all the front office businesses that are out there, all the trading businesses and whatnot. And so I'd say that at a high level is probably the biggest challenge, is keeping it up and keeping things prioritized. But I think like the easiest way to do that is to make sure that you've got you and your entire team and organization, or as many of them as possible, have frequent and productive communication with your customers. And that's just very, very important to make sure that you're listening to them, you're getting feedback, and that you're actually acting on that feedback and factoring it into the overall experience with your products.
Yeah, yeah. Is there feedback that just to make it real poignant that you've heard recently that comes to mind that you'd have to build out? I mean, are you guys interfacing through API endpoints, which is where a lot of the development goes to the front end software, or
It's a big
technically? Yeah,
piece of it.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the first step is collecting data from wherever we need to collect it, and there's always a new source. So I mean that's a constant machine that's building out new connectivity and whatnot, and maintaining it, because the more that you have, the more maintenance there is to keep them all up to date, because they're constantly changing and improving as well. Um, and but there's lots of processes for that. I mean, I'd say most of the feedback that we get is on, like, lately DEXs are a huge theme in the whole DeFi world, because the data inherently is even more complex than the other crypto assets that we've already been dealing with for a while. Um, and then there's always a new asset or a new exchange or a new custodian or some other entity that you have to add to it. And so we've just got processes to do that continuously, and we build it out based on customer demand.
yeah. Can you dive into DEXs for a minute? Just
Sure.
explain what they are and what they're used for, and maybe how you interact with them or use them.
Sure. So, I mean, I'll give a more practical answer here. I mean, we've got traditional exchanges that have private databases where you're signing up for an account, just like any other traditional account that someone's used to signing up for, with your email address and a username and a password and whatnot. And you're going through KYC procedures now for, or at least all the U.S. exchanges and many of the more mature ones. And but there's someone that's behind a customer support desk. There's usually a transaction report that you can download and whatnot. And in contrast, in a DEX, very often you don't even have an account whatsoever. You're just connecting one of your wallet addresses. But the big benefit that you get is you get access to a lot more assets that you can get on the private exchanges. But there's a lot of other new things that you have to consider when trading there as well. All the different fees and the structures and the different risks that are associated with it. But the thing that attracts people is that accessibility and the broader coverage. And now they can do that without signing up for an exchange that's offshore that they might be prohibited from using from a regulatory or legal perspective. Now we can do that. We can access the breadth of all the assets in a decentralized format. So for trading, very attractive. Very difficult to trade larger quantities on DEXs. You usually have to buy them in smaller fees, or it's not very efficient, I guess, stereotypically. But the reporting downstream is very challenging because now we are dealing with truly decentralized data that is recorded in blockchains. And a lot of the data that you need to facilitate reporting exists in the underlying smart contracts that are facilitating the trading activity. And that's really where the complexity begins in reporting. And you can't just say that you've got support for DEXs. You've got to do it on an individual DEX by DEX basis. Ethereum-based ones have similarities and so on, but they all are designed uniquely.
And from a tax perspective, having a decentralized exchange sounds really exciting because is it true that how does KYC work with decentralized exchanges?
It doesn't
exist, right?
Or I haven't seen one anyway. I'm not going to say that there isn't something out there, but I would be surprised.
Because effectively, there's no recognition of an entity from a government perspective,
correct?
Right? Because
you don't even have an account or a username, or you're literally just connecting your wallet and authorizing a trade to occur, but between two assets usually, and so the reporting requirements downstream get much more challenging. But all the tax that the taxes and the calculations there are all pretty simple. It's more just figuring out how to interpret the data in an automated way. That is the challenge, rather than the actual final result.
I found it quite surprising how poor some of the major exchanges were with tax reporting. Like having to go through. I would have thought it's automated, right? They see all the different trades you do.
Oh no, there's not a single exchange out there that can do that, and it's because of something pretty simple. Most people don't have one online broker dealer, right? People don't have just TradeStation or just E-Trade or something where they're accessing their traditional markets and then getting 1099s at the end of the year, in the US anyway. For these big exchanges, you're buying on one exchange, you're usually transferring to another exchange to access other things, or you're transferring to a private wallet, and then you're trading on DEXs. And in order to calculate any form of capital gains across a portfolio like that, across multiple sources, the one exchange that maybe you bought on doesn't have the complete picture. So they can't. If you bought it on that exchange, transferred it out, and sold it somewhere else, they have no idea whether or not you sold it or not. So they only have one side of the equation. So that's why providers like Lukka are necessary when creating taxes, because you need to collect it from all the various sources. An exception would be like a Robinhood, right? Or a place where you can buy crypto and you can't transfer it off.
Then
it vastly simplifies it, right? Then they can actually do 1099s in a more traditional way. But that's pretty rare, and it's the layman trader. Usually
it's not
buying on a platform like that.
Not very interesting. I put a little bit of money, a couple thousand, into Robinhood, and I bought Bitcoin. And it wasn't until I bought crypto that I realized you couldn't trade it out. I wasn't,
Right.
certainly didn't read all the terms of service. And they say, oh, you can't withdraw. And I didn't even think that that would be possible for an exchange to
Yep.
lock it in. But that's,
It's just a business decision that
yeah,
they make when
yep,
they're building their products at the end of the day.
yep. It's got to be safer from their perspective, from a regulatory perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of technical barriers when facilitating a trading platform like that 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 get a lot that are a lot more simple
Mm-hmm.
if you're not allowing people to transfer it off your platform. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it's at least a place to start. On the DEXs, if you from a tax perspective, anyone who uses a DEX is responsible for their own taxes on a consumer level. Is there analogous products on the consumer level? Is Luca in consumer today, or would be? And
we are, yeah. There's a ton of consumer or retail solutions that are out
Mhm.
there, all varying very widely in quality. If you put the same results into a lot of different, or the same data into a lot of different tools, you're going to see different gain loss results, for example. And But yeah, absolutely. Luca has focused on institutions. However, we do have a free portfolio management tool called Luca Essentials,
Mm,
and then there's a small fee that we charge um, to generate a tax report for a given tax year
mm,
as an add-on to the free portfolio management tool.
mhm,
And that was just recently launched this past January, so it's newer.
mhm,
Um, but they're benefiting from the same institutional quality standards and calculations. And we have an auditor come in and test all of our technology controls every single year as part of a SOC audit.
mm,
And so the retail customers are benefiting from those same things as the institutional ones that require it, even if most of the time they don't realize that they're
mhm,
benefiting from it.
mhm.
But
Yeah.
and then valuing the assets too. I mean, at fair market value is very challenging. It has to be done in unique ways, and that's, I'd say, what the most common discrepancy that I've seen with a lot of different solutions out there is they're not actually valuing these crypto assets at fair market value, um, and which is another one of the many complexities with the crypto ecosystem.
When you say that, does that mean they're not? I would think that they're going to take a fair marketplace price at the point at which it was traded in U.S. dollars, and use that as the value. You're saying that that's
Sure, but if
possible.
that price is different across 20 different
Uh,
exchanges, which one do you use?
yeah.
And so if you paid cash for it, it's really easy, right? It's what you paid for it, or it's what you sold it for. So that's straightforward. It's when you trade crypto assets for one another, and now you don't have any fiat or US dollar in the United States for US tax reporting, right? Is not part of that whatsoever. Now you have to bring in a data source to value those assets. And the question is, well, what do we value Bitcoin at based on the date timestamp when there's 20 different prices that are out there?
Mm,
And some of those prices, particularly with some of the exchanges overseas, are known for price manipulation and other things like that. And so, how do we weed out those ones so that we are using it? And if you look at any accounting standards, generally speaking, it says that you have to use an executed price on a primary market at the close of day. But there isn't a primary market for crypto. There aren't for any of the assets, and there isn't a close of day. They're open 24/7. So how do we do that? And so, I won't get into the details here. We have a pricing product called Lukka Prime that values the top 1,000 or so crypto assets at fair market value using a methodology that addresses all of those
Interesting.
those many things.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's in the weeds, but it's also like I think a really interesting point between where government oversight and taxes
mhm.
engage with the crypto world, because we have a policy, at least in this country, that when you trade any currency, not as a currency asset against another asset, that it's recognized as a capital gain, and so uh, that has to be assessed against the U.S. dollar. Do you think there's like is the government just misengaging with how they structure taxes? Like, if you take a first principles perspective, does this make sense? I mean, do you think we ought to just rethink this entirely?
no, I mean they're doing things correctly. They're just moving at government agency
Yeah.
pays, so, but I mean, the IRS is auditing people today. It's,
Yeah.
it's public information. They're auditing people, but they're just getting started
Yeah.
doing it. And I'm sure they'll continue to do it more,
Hmm.
just like they do traditional audits. And the amount of U.S. tax filers that are audited annually, not just for crypto, but just generically, is all public information on the IRS's website.
Mm.
And you can see the metrics, and it's a pretty small percentage relative to the overall population of tax filers. But they don't have to audit you in the year that you file. I mean, particularly if they detect fraud or other things, and I'm not going to quote the codes and laws and whatnot, but there's a long period that they have an opportunity
Yeah.
to go audit you for. So
Yeah.
just because you filed last year and you haven't been audited does
Yeah.
not mean you're in the clear.
In the
So,
clear. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And I'm sure over time here, particularly with all of the adoption of crypto this year, I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume that any local tax authority, not just in the US, is probably going to be looking more closely and is going to be conducting more audits related to crypto in the future.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. 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 I think that's a good point. It's a
right.
nice reminder. What about what else? Are there other things that you think about on a day-to-day basis that you find interesting, either crypto or non-crypto, or projects, or just general initiatives that you're pretty bullish on that you think people may not know about? If nothing comes to mind, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of really interesting things that we're seeing in the crypto industry right now, because you're seeing, I mean, a lot of very interesting things going on around the world. I mean,
Mhm.
everything with the pandemic, um, and everybody working remotely,
Mm.
including traditional organizations. Some of those now getting back into the office. There's a lot of people that seem to be changing their careers lately. I think I'm seeing,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of other people have been seeing that as well, which I think is really interesting. It's attracting a lot of new talent and a different caliber of talent to the crypto ecosystem specifically,
Mm.
which is very exciting. I think good for everyone. And you're seeing a lot of crypto talent that's been involved in crypto get hired by some of the traditional. So it's going in all
Mm.
directions, but there's this big intersection. And meanwhile, not only are we trading assets in a new way and doing it, so just that being crypto assets, but businesses are learning how to operate in new ways as well. So I think it's just a very interesting time.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot of organizations do some very exciting things,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah. I've noticed that there seems to be a lot of folks that have been maybe in the traditional academic pathway. They're getting their
Hmm.
master's and PhD in cybersecurity or cryptography or even math or computer science. And
Right.
traditionally, like, that pathway was well worn towards tenure and you become
Hmm.
a professor. But I think the other X factor here is that online education is disrupting the traditional college paths. And I think the funding
Hmm.
for especially smaller or more remote schools is in question. And so if you're looking at that as saying, hey, what's my 20-year career path? I think I've seen a lot of folks that have been more academic jump into crypto because it's at this early stage where a lot of it is, I don't want to say theoretical, but very technical. So it does take a real expert to dive into some of this early
Hmm.
infrastructure, and that's really exciting for investors when they see that, and it's a solid signal for other people too. And I think, like you said, people who are switching from that
Hmm.
academic path to a more private sector path, it's great. It's like we're actually putting those skills to use, which is
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more courses at universities
Yeah.
and other schools that are going to be touching a number of different topics that touch crypto. And then but there's always a lag between when those the universities adapts to something that's this big,
Mhm.
before you actually experience it in workforces and whatnot. And so I think that's started now,
Mhm.
but it's just beginning to start. And so another thing that's very exciting that I think will only further accelerate the adoption of this industry going forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and I think even the teachers, it really comes down to the professors who are teaching the material.
mhm,
And if they're not going to schools and they're just teaching online, then what attracts someone to go to the school and learn that that specialty like it once was. So
Mhm.
it's all kind of shifting. Like I think education is very much in the mix with how crypto evolves because it is, it's a
It's
domain where,
evolving right now
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah, for a number of other reasons outside of crypto. But yeah, as they're redefining it.
yeah, yeah. And is your team totally remote, or are you centralized in a few cities?
So we were headquartered we are headquartered in New York City,
Hmm.
and so the majority of our team is there. But in the last almost 18 months, we've been fully remote,
Hmm.
um, and we will be going back to an office, but we're going to have multiple offices, and we have now roughly, I'd say, approaching 20% of the company that's not in that New York headquarters. So
Hmm.
we've definitely been hiring around, and we've been hiring globally. Um, and so we're definitely not going to go back to working the way that we were
Mm.
before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we'll probably, I think our goal right now, and we're still teasing out all the details, is to create a flexible arrangement where we can accommodate people, because there's people that are very happy working remotely, and they're productive and successful and productive. And there's others that can't wait to go into the office, and then there's people in the middle. So there's a whole spectrum.
Yeah.
So our goal is, as long as it's a productive environment, um, and collaborative, then we're trying to put together a model that allows flexibility, and it's a lot more flexibility than before the pandemic. So I do believe we're a stronger organization today, hands down, than we were before.
Yeah. Good for you.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's probably a lot of organizations have
Yeah.
been forced
Yeah. Yeah. I think
to
it's
do that.
something the organizations, companies would have never done it otherwise. They would have never,
Mhm.
there wouldn't have been the motivation to do it. So it's definitely people have talked about.
Yeah, they were kind of forced
Yeah.
a little bit, and some have learned, some are probably not going to learn, and we're going to see everything in between.
Yeah. Is there anything that's top of mind for you that you're looking for, or that for people listening, whether it's raising money or a specific customer that you're trying to reach, or hiring people, anything that's like uniquely top of mind for you at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for top talent. We have all
Mhm.
kinds of job posts that are open, a ton of open requisites here at Lukka, and there's also a ton of other, great companies in the crypto ecosystem for anybody that's interested. But I'd say if you haven't bought crypto and you're interested in it, there's one way to go actually dive in, and you don't have to do it in a way that's irresponsible. Someone can buy a very small amount and kind of go through the motions and learn. Even if you're a layman to traditional trading, it's very easy to get into it, um, and uh, and that's the best way to really learn, is to
Hmm.
get that hands-on experience. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's really as simple as that.
Yeah.
Um, and and yeah, no, we hope to continue to bring in top talents, at Luca, and the rest of the industry, so
Yeah.
that we can see where this goes.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Congrats on all the progress, Robert. And
Thank you.
yeah, I wish you the best in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting me today.
All right, man. Take care.